Hi there. Today we're going to do something a little bit different and fun. I'm joined by David Singer, who's the executive director of Limmud North America. Limmud is an international, awesome Jewish learning initiative community of people who want to express things about their faith, their observance, their lack of faith, lack of observance through creative, interesting, and intellectually stimulating ways. So Limmud has events all over the world, all the time. I've been to several Limmud events, and I was at one of the virtual events that took place during the quarantine. And David and I really enjoyed talking, and he facilitated a talk that I did that had Q&A. And essentially, there were a lot of questions that people asked that I didn't get to answer. And I want to answer them, not because I like to hear myself talk, but because the questions that were brought up were brought up by people who were asking difficult questions, but they really wanted answers. Sometimes people will ask me difficult questions like, well, why do you believe in God? Just because they want to hear themselves talk about why God doesn't exist or things like that. But what the Limmud community prides itself on is having people of diverse and differing opinions who learn to come together to communicate in ways that are productive for all. And these questions were really born out of that. And so I wanted to answer them because I think there are things that other people want to know about. And I also wanted to provide Limmud the opportunity to let the people who didn't get their questions answered have their questions answered. And also just to kind of promote the pluralistic and kind of post-denominational world that Limmud revolves in, which I consider myself a member of. So, David, thank you.
Mayim, it's so nice to be with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
It is my pleasure. So we went over some of the questions that didn't get answered, and we picked sort of the top 10 or so.
Yeah.
I'll let you ask however you want, and I'll answer as best as I can.
So, you gave this talk at eFestival about being Bialikuva. And I'm wondering if you could actually start by telling us a little bit more about at what point in your life you took on that definition of yourself, and really, if you can briefly, for those who don't remember a few weeks ago or are just catching up on your story, like what does that title mean for you?
So the term Ba'alat Tshuva, or Bal Tshuva, as I say more colloquially, refers to a person who was not raised religious, but took on observance later in life. It is the owner of the return, the owner of the response to the things that the universe has given us. I actually didn't even think of that term. I had heard it used, but I never even thought of myself as a Bal Tshuva until I was in the process of preparing for my wedding, and my, at the time, fiance was in the process of converting to Judaism. And our rabbi, which is Chaim Seidler-Feller, who was at UCLA Hillel at the time, explained that we can take on customs either, for example, for Passover, you can actually, when you become more observant, you can take on Sephardic customs as your custom because you weren't raised one particular way or the other. And that's when it became clear to me that I had a special designation in the Jewish community as someone who wasn't raised religious, and therefore there are different, not requirements, but different choices that I have. Ultimately, I chose to be Ashkenazi, which is what I was raised, because so much of my cultural and religious observance, even before I became more religious, was consistent with Ashkenazi practice. But people who are Bal Tshuva tend to be, I don't want to say revered by people who are from birth, but my Kala teacher, which is the woman I studied with before I got married, she explained to me and went over some of the, the teachings about people who choose a religious life, that it's a harder decision to say goodbye to a lot of the things that are comfortable and that you're used to and that don't really make you a bad Jew per se. But it's a special designation of people who take that on. So I am considered a Bal Tshuva, and I guess began using that word more after I had my first son, when I started learning with Partners in Torah, and I started studying with someone who was also a Bal Tshuva. And that's when it became kind of more of my, I guess, identity.
That's so interesting. Thank you. You mentioned you referred to learning, and we of course at Limmud care a lot about learning because that's what we're all about. What is your learning practice? Do you have a learning practice?
So my learning practice has shifted, as having children and breastfeeding and getting a doctorate and having a full-time job dictates. Obviously, for women, I've seen the reason that there are mitzvot which we are technically not needing to do because they are time bound. And I definitely found in the early stages when I had young babies and was the primary caregiver for them, oh yeah, going to Minyan 3 times a day would be extremely difficult right now. And also when I said Kaddish for my father, Zichrono Livracha, I did say Kaddish for a year, which typically is not required of women. There's a lot of discussion about that. But I realized that if my children were younger, I would not have been able to go to Minyan at 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Anyway, that being said, my learning has shifted also as my life circumstances have changed. I started learning through Partners in Torah, which is really the first time that I formally learned with a chavrusa. I had studied getting ready for my wedding with a Kala teacher, as I mentioned, but I learned through Partners in Torah with Allison Josephs, who has an online presence as Jew in the City. And her whole platform is about debunking myths about Orthodoxy. So that's kind of where we started with our learning. We read Soloveitchik, we studied the Malachas of Shabbos, we studied very classical texts, and also, got into some philosophy. During my Big Bang Theory years, I actually studied Aryeh Kaplan with Eric Kaplan, unrelated, who was one of the co-executive producers of Big Bang Theory. We learned for many years. We also learned with David Sachs, who's another, from Hollywood Jew. So we studied different things, but we studied Sefer Yetzirah was what we studied on set. So my Big Bang Theory, usually Friday mornings before work started, I would learn on set, and it was really, really wonderful to have that kind of learning even in the environment of a Hollywood set, and it gave a lot of perspective, to say the least. That was really a really important part of my life because my observance was different. I often had to work on holidays, and so learning was a grounding experience for me then. I learn with Rabbi David Kasher from IKAR. I'm in 3 of his study learning groups. I'm in a Pirkei Avos group, and there's also a Hollywood Talmud group that he runs for people in Hollywood, tends to focus more on legal halacha and Talmud stuff of that variety. I'm trying to think. I do learn with Shep Rosenman, who happens to be my entertainment lawyer, but before he was that, he was my mentor, and he and I have learned together with another Limmud friend. And the 3 of us meet every Monday, for over a year, and that's Pirkei Avos as well. So I try and learn 2 to 3 times a week. And obviously with my children, it's hard in the quarantine because Shabbos used to be a really structured time to be in shul, talk about the Parsha. It's harder. Everything's been harder Jewishly because of the quarantine, but that's kind of my learning rhythm. I find it the most intellectually stimulating thing to do in my religious and secular practice is Jewish learning. And I think a lot of people think that it's like, oh, let's study the Bible. That's not what we do. Sometimes we do that, but mostly it's finding creative ways to use our philosophical and intellectual capabilities to understand divinity, whatever that means to you.
That sounds like an extremely broad and serious, really, approach to learning. Yep. I commend you on that. You mentioned when we were last together, you talked quite a bit about your own approach to prayer, and specifically within that, you talked about the nature of as a woman praying in a space with men, right? Mm-hmm. and how that can be distracting potentially, and I'm interested if you could talk a little bit more about this and just explore that with us.
Yeah, I was raised in a Reform synagogue, and I was raised with really no knowledge, honestly, of halacha, besides what I vaguely heard about my Orthodox family who had moved to Israel when I was born, who were religious Zionists and very, very religious. And I knew really very little of halacha. I had never studied it or learned it. And when I was a young feminist, it was very distasteful to me that men and women were separated. It was very distasteful to me that there were different restrictions for women. There are still things that completely make me nuts about the distinctions between men and women. The issue of agunot, of women who cannot be granted a divorce in Orthodoxy, is still an enormous problem. Women are not able to be witnesses in legal situations, also a problem. But as I started taking on observance and also started learning about how different communities pray, I soon learned that if I was separate from, at that time, my husband, I was a lot more focused on prayer. For me, and this is just me, it may not be everyone's story. For me, there was like always something to ask him or like tell him or like deal with the kid or like do this. And it became, for me, it became an unhealthy extension of just married life. It was like, oh, now we're just in a synagogue and like, oh, can you do this? And I realized that when I had my own space, it allowed me to make more of my own space. And obviously with young children, davening, praying was very difficult. I was often in and out. I was breastfeeding. Certain synagogues do not want you to breastfeed. Certain synagogues are cool with you breastfeeding. So my prayer in general got very, very fragmented as a mom of young kids. And what I found is that when my kids were finally old enough, I wanted space where it was just mine. And for me, I do that better when I'm not with my partner and when I'm not with, also the women's side tends to be quieter and smaller in most communities. So often you do get more a kind of quiet and special space. And for me, I didn't feel like I was being separated. I felt like we were all being separated. And it is a very, very old-fashioned notion as well. But for me, I chose to see it as an opportunity to have my own time. And I tend to be friends more with men than women. So often for me, it is more distracting being on the men's side because I know more people that I normally hang out with. So it just kind of evolved that way, that it's not that I won't pray where there's not a mechitza, where there's not a divider. It's that if given the choice, I would prefer to be in a setting where there's a men's side, a women's side, and a mixed side in the middle. And some communities are doing that. Yeah, I don't like being behind a wall. I've said Kaddish with my face up against a wall. I've been in a lot of really, really distasteful situations. Also in communities where women typically do not pray. That's the reason there's not a devoted women's section. And you could say, it's like, is it the chicken or the egg? But in a lot of communities, women don't want to go to shul 3 times a day. Many don't feel the obligation to say Kaddish for a year. So those spaces are still being carved out. And I think it's something we still need to figure out. But absolutely for me now, I still do prefer to really have my own space. And I find I do that better when I'm, in separate sections, as it were. I mean, if I could be in my own section, that's also the most ideal.
It sounds almost really like what you're articulating is that your drive is creating a sanctuary for yourself, rather than segregating yourself, segregating sexes. That really this is about creating an isolated place where you can interact with the divine. Is that
absolutely fair? And honestly, and this is, gender is a thing. People, everyone's different. And generally speaking, I talk to a lot of men, I talk to a lot of women. There are plenty of women I speak to, including my Orthodox family, who are like, why would you want to go to shul and daven? Like, why would you want to do that? It's like, you don't have to do that. Stay home, stay in your PJs. So a lot of women also, and a lot of men, I'm sure, may not feel a desire to have that kind of like sacred, holy experience when they pray. For me, that's what I want. Like, that's the experience I want. It's not just like, go see your friends. And I pass no judgment on that. The synagogue that I go to, a lot of people come and hang out and socialize the whole time. Also totally fine. If that's their Shabbos experience, totally fine. For me, I want to be like deep in prayer. It's a very emotional thing for me to pray. There's a lot of kavanah. Like, I need to have a lot of structure around it. And the synagogue that I go to regularly for Shabbos does not have mixed seating. I will also say that. I often like to stand in the back. My 14-year-old and I also just like quiet space, and we often, put our taluses over our heads, or he puts his over his head and I watch. And we just daven quietly against a wall. There's a lot of people who do that, in my shul. So.
You just actually, you began to articulate a little bit about what family Jewish life looks for you, beyond just your own personal interaction. Can you tell us a little bit more? What does the Jewish home at Mayim's house look like?
Well, I think I should give honor to my parents, because we were not a religious family. My mother was raised Orthodox, and there were a lot of remnants of Orthodoxy in our home, but we had an incredibly Jewish home. And even though religiously, we kind of did what the Reform calendar did, we had holidays that marked the year and that marked the seasons. We often lit candles on Friday night, then my mom stopped. I was raised in a kosher home. No one ever mentioned that until my mom decided to stop having a kosher home. But our home was full of Jewish humor, intellectualism, stories, comedy. My grandparents, were Eastern European. So when they visited, it felt like the shtetl was brought to us, which is exactly what it was. So I guess I try and recreate that to a certain extent for my children. We have all the Judaica that one would need for all of the holidays, and we take it out when appropriate and necessary. I recited the Shema to my children. We've fallen out of habit, and it's something we should really get back into. But I recited the Shema for my children, and they would sing it for the first many years of their life. My older son started chanting more of the Ve'ahavta as he got closer to bar mitzvah. And my younger one will probably start that up because his bar mitzvah parsha is Veschanan, which is the Ve'ahavta. So it's probably a good time to start practicing. I'm trying to think, for holidays, we're pretty stark. I usually host, or my ex-husband hosts. We co-parent nicely enough that we split Yom Tovim, which is great, meaning he'll come here, I'll go there. He hosts my mother, I host his mother. It's all one big, happy Jewish family. So I think holidays are really when, I get to get more into learning with the boys. There's plenty of holidays, including minor fasts, which are designated to introduce a rhythm to the year and a connection with history. So that's something that I lay in pretty heavy with. I'm trying to think what else. Aleph Beta is a really wonderful online educational source that we also will use for animated interpretations of Torah and philosophy and Jewish thought. So that's something I do with them. And we go to shul, we go to shul on Shabbos. We light candles Friday night. We pray for people who are not well. And that's a rhythm to our week. I bless my children before we eat. They want to sing less with me, which is sad. And that's why the quarantine's been so hard, because they would sing in shul. They would sing with other people and, as a community, easier than the three of us sitting at a table, let's sing Shalom Aleichem together. But our life is very, musically, we're very Jewish. My older son plays the violin, and I've taught him some Yiddish tunes. So I play piano. So everything about us kind of has, I guess, a Jewish flair that way. Yeah, that's us. And I absolutely, I'm like my parents and my grandparents, oh, did you know Eddie Vedder's Jewish? No, Ma, we didn't know. Well, he is, and honestly, that's a large part also of our cultural identification. We're 2%, of the United States population, and we exist in a lot of interesting places. So I also I've started to do some education surrounding World War II and surrounding Holocaust education. Our kids are homeschooled. So yeah, that's a big answer.
It's clear. I mean, it's so clear just how much Jewish animates you. I'm just you exude this great pride. Your smile is giving it fully aware. It's you're just sort of breathing this. It seems a real, love and appreciation for Judaism.
Well, I'm almost 100% Jewish, says my DNA profile. So I'm pretty close. I think I might be the Jewiest person that we know.
Do you feel like you owe something to Judaism or owe something to the Jewish people because of that, or in appreciation of that?
The word "oh," kind of, it trips me up because, I mean, there's no way to give this answer without sounding like a religious fanatic, but I'm going to give it anyway. What I owe is to, my creator, like, and that's a very, it's a very traditional, Jewish concept that we are all dust and ashes. And, we've all been given this opportunity to be on the planet for, like, this is it. This is not the dress rehearsal. Like, this is it. This is the last day that I'll have, this day as a 44-year-old, right? Tomorrow's a new day. And that's the only thing that I feel I owe. I owe it to, the source of my life, which sure is my parents and my grandparents, but ultimately the source of my life is the force of the universe that created the ability for there to be my consciousness, your consciousness, and all of us existing on the planet. So what does that mean? What am I obligated to do? For me to serve God means to be an example of the highest level that we believe God can exist at: compassionate, slow to anger, loving, kind, generous. I seek to be these things. I don't do them perfectly because I'm not God, but I do feel that, the responsibility to gather all of the scattered shards of light, that were scattered at creation. It is our job to put them back. And so that's what I feel like every day. I don't drink caffeine. I literally wake up feeling like Eye of the Tiger. Like, here I go, let's do this again. And that doesn't mean I wake up joyful every day. It means that I wake up every day and I put my feet on the ground and I thank God that I get to do it again and do it better than I did yesterday. I do feel a certain obligation to the Jewish people because I'm a public person. That's a lot of responsibility, and that's also really hard because I don't necessarily always speak for all the Jewish people. That's also not my job. I also noticed there's a box behind me and I should have moved that before we started filming, but it's trash and I haven't thrown it out. I feel like I don't feel Judaism owes anything to me because Judaism is it's a human construct that my people historically came up with to try and serve God and to try and understand the universe and to try and understand that we're all hurtling through space. And it's unfathomable that we exist at all. And if I do believe, if the consciousness of God were to stop thinking about us, it would be, we wouldn't exist just like that. So that's how I see it.
You just did something really interesting, which I don't know to the extent you're even aware of it. But you started talking about God in very untraditional God language. Right? You talked about the source of life, the creator, right? It was very almost scientific words. And over the course, which is not surprising given who you are, but then over the course of your description of why you serve that, right? You morphed into these very liturgically and Jewish philosophically grounded terms. And it was fascinating to just hear you talk about the divine almost through that process that so well, I think, encapsulates the multitude of your interests and your being.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. And I can't wait to listen back to this because, that to me, that's how easy it is to be a person of faith and a person of science. And I don't think you need to be a scientist to believe in God. And you don't need to believe in God to be a scientist. And you can have any profession you'd like and not believe in God or believe in God. But the fact is, if that's a conflict, that it shouldn't be, and that's what I was taught. And to me, they are seamless. Like my existence as a person who understands the laws of nature is completely overlapping and only emphasizes my appreciation for something that is not explainable by an equation,
Thank you for showing us how to do that. I want to shift for a bit, if I can. We had, some outstanding questions, I think, that really point to your role as a public person, your role as someone who works within Hollywood. Specifically, we had a lot of questions about Israel, right, which has become such a passionate hot button issue, and I'm wondering how that comes up in your work and that comes up in your interactions with others. Does it come up? Do you feel a desire, a need, an interest in defending Israel, promoting Israel, doing PR for Israel? I wonder how that comes up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give the shortest answer possible because I feel like it's its own topic. You know, I've tried to be really, really clear, especially on social media. You know, a lot of young people don't really know much about Israel, both of the Jewish and non-Jewish variety. Sorry, my cat's being noisy. A lot of people simply don't know about Israel. They don't know what Israel is. They don't know what Zionism is. Many young people in particular believe that Zionism is a word that means racism, meaning I've had people defending me and saying Mayim would never be a Zionist, not realizing that it's actually not a negative word. So I've been very clear that Zionism is the belief in an autonomous, secure Jewish state. That's what Zionism is. There are religious Zionists who believe it's their God-given right to have that state. That's a different conversation. There are secular Zionists who do not want anything to do with religion, but believe in, you know, having the Jewish state as safe and autonomous. It has definitely become a hot button issue that Israel is absolutely open to scrutiny, as it should be, as any nation should be. And there are things that Israel as a country does that I don't like. There are things that the United States does as a country that I don't like. And that does not change my belief that the state of Israel deserves to exist as an autonomous, free homeland for the Jewish people. And I do support a Palestinian state. I've talked about it. The parameters of that are not for me to elucidate because I'm not a politician. I don't live in Israel. And I don't know that one celebrity should get to decide what the policies of the state of Israel should be. That being said, I am a bleeding heart liberal, and that holds true no matter where in the world we're talking about. I believe in promoting the rights of women. I believe in promoting the rights of the oppressed. And that is something that a lot of people feel I haven't gone far enough with, and a lot of people feel like I've gone too far with. So the fact is, you know, two Jews, three opinions. And it is really disappointing to me that I have had Palestinian groups protest my existence and my presence in more than one place in this country. That's really sad to me because I've been such a public advocate of a more nuanced approach to understanding the Israeli-Palestinian situation. That being said, I go to Israel. I believe Zionists should go to Israel. And I've gone about every other year since I'm 16 years old. I have gone during peace times. I've gone during war times. Many members of my family live there. I have religious Zionist family. We don't talk about politics. I have family that live deep in the West Bank. I have secular family that live on a kibbutz. I've got everything in between. I love Israel. It's my favorite place to be. There are problems in that country, absolutely. And there are also things that I find nowhere else in the universe. It's my homeland. It's my spiritual homeland. It's my religious homeland. It's my historical homeland. And the fact is, a lot of people who are liberals have started to view or portray Israel as colonizers and oppressors, and I think that's an unfair lens. Most Jews in Hollywood stay away from this topic because it's not fun to be accused of trying to solving it wrong, being accused of being a baby murderer, having death threats against you. These are all things that most people don't want to deal with. And it's a very, 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 very complicated issue. And I also do believe that, for my family that made Aliyah and my family that lives there, those are the people that are living that reality every day, not me. So yeah, planning my next trip as soon as I can fly again.
You mentioned that there are some things in Israel that you just can't find anywhere else in terms of the way that it pulls on you. and I saw the smile across your face. I'm wondering what are some of those things that you love about Israel?
Oh my goodness. You know, I'm one of those people. I'm like a 15-year-old on Ulpan, you know. I kiss the ground when I get there. I kiss the ground before I leave. Um, there's nothing like the food of Israel. There's nothing like the culture of food. You know, it's the Middle East and also it's Western. It's a really, really interesting combination. I love the old city. I'll wander around the old city all day if you let me. The first time I went to the Kotel was Hanukkah. I was 16 years old and it was raining. And I've been at the Kotel when it snowed, which is very, very unusual. I like the way the air smells. I like the energy in the air. When you have people all believing and praying at the same time, it creates something in the air. And it's something, I'm a scientist. It's something that doesn't have an equation. I mean, I've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and I had an experience there that was also indescribable. There's something about that city in particular. And I consider Israel my country. I love that my country is an outdoorsy friendly country. I love the nature. I love the diversity of the terrain. I love the pace. You know, I'm a New York style person, so Israel works pretty well for me. And I love all the different colors of the soldiers. I love, you know, in my lifetime, I've seen it go from, you know, one Ethiopian Israeli soldier to so many, and there's so many different kinds of Jews. And yeah, it's a great city. It's a great country.
It is. It is. Do you have friends in the entertainment industry who are on your same path and observant like you, or observant
I
in other
don't know
ways?
any, I don't know any actresses. There's a couple actors. Josh Molina is someone who's very vocal about being observantish, or you know. And he and I, whenever we got to work together on Big Bang Theory, so we would always wish each other whatever holiday was close. David Sachs is someone I mentioned. Eric Kaplan is someone I've learned with for years. Shep Rosenman, who really got me involved in Limmud, was really someone who, you know, I feel like I share a derech with him. I share a path with him. You know, he's like not old enough to be my dad, but he's kind of like my coolest, you know, uncle. And having a lawyer who is observant, having a lawyer who helps guide my career in terms of what I can do and what I can't do is one of the most important aspects of my career. I'd say it's really in a lot of ways, it's the engine that runs my career, because I know that I have someone who understands that I will always want to act in accordance with the laws of Moshe and Israel, meaning in terms of my ethics and in terms of my commitments. You know, that's incredibly important to me, to have someone on my side, you know, who not just who is like me, but who understands the way my brain thinks, which really is it's a Jewish brain.
We are almost out of time, and so I want to know, see if we can end with this question, right? Like, what is, if you had to figure out one thing, what is the biggest lesson that you wish everyone knew, right? The lesson that changed your Judaism, that you would think might change other people's appreciation of Judaism or being Jewish. What's that one thing?
It's hard to pick. You know, I think that one of the things, okay, I'm going to give two. One of them is that, you know, there's a lot of conversation about like God, and I feel like people really get hung up on God. And I feel like it can really, for me, it really shifted, and it shifts conversations when I say to people, do you believe the sun will come up tomorrow? And they say, of course. And to me, that was a really important realization for me to have, that that's the same faith. We may call it different things. I may choose to honor the sun coming up in different ways. I may choose to cry because it brings me to my knees that the sun comes up every day. But if you believe that and you simply acknowledge that the sun comes up, we have the same faith. It's the same faith. And to me, it diffuses a lot of complicated conversations about, do you believe in God, don't you? Because to me, that's really not what we should be here talking about. We should be talking about what's the best way to do holy work that helps lift up the oppressed. and helps voices that need to be heard be heard. And I don't really care if you're motivated by God or not. If we all know that we're here to do that work, we get to do it together. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, you know, the classic teaching that you should carry 2 pieces of paper, one in each pocket, and one says, for me, the world was created, and the other says, I'm dust and ashes. That really is that's one of my main guiding principles. And it is that tension that for me embodies Judaism. It is the tension that my Rav, Rabbi Seidler-Feller, taught me to live in and to dive into and to not run from. That's what keeps me engaged in the work I do professionally, the work I do personally, the work I do on myself, the work I do as a mother, as a partner, as an ex-wife, as a daughter. That's what it is. The world was created for me. What am I going to do with that? What am I going to do with that awesome responsibility to not be bowled over by it? And also, I'm dust and ashes. There is a whole world out there of other people who are also equally humble and will be returned to the earth. So we get to do what we can with our time. This is, again, not a dress rehearsal.
It's a profound teaching, and it's an extraordinary gift that you've given all of us in teaching that and sharing all of this with us today. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your role modelship and for all you do for fans, for the Jews, for the world, and for Limmud. So thank you so much.
And I'd really, again, just want to thank Limmud for the opportunity to open up this aspect of my Judaism. You know, I was raised, as many of us were, that Judaism has to stay in its box, you know, keep in your lane. And Limmud is one of the only places that is showing that we all can exist together. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of that as a participant. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayim. Be well.
Thanks, David.